Cartoons have been capturing imaginations since the early 20th century, starting with Gertie the dinosaur to the adventurous Bugs Bunny and moving on to the Stone Age Flintstones. These classics set the stage for what was to come. Then, along came a show that disrupted the animated world like no other. Dexter's Laboratory! Join me as we explore how Dexter's Laboratory changed cartoons forever. It's crazy to think that it's been 27 years since the little ginger-haired genius first stepped into his secret lab, donned his white lab coat, and started stirring up all sorts of mayhem. We've got to remember that when Dexter's Laboratory just aired, Cartoon Network was still trying to find its footing. This was pre-Adventure Time, pre-Steven Universe, even pre-SpongeBob. The landscape of animated television was totally different. But then along came Dexter, the diminutive scientist with a gigantic secret lab filled with wondrous high-tech marvels that would make even Tony Stark raise an eyebrow. But the show was incomplete without his annoying older sister, Dee Dee, whose incessant curiosity and knack for destruction would often put Dexter's inventions and patience to the test. It was an instant hit, and it's not hard to see why. What set Dexter's Laboratory apart was its clever writing. Now, that was a show that really hit it out of the park when it came to quick wit and humor. Every time Dexter or Dee Dee opened their mouths, comedy gold just spilled out.
Dee Dee, these are my friends from far away. They're going on a trip to, Candyland. Candyland? Let's go! Ooh, pretty lights.
But you know it wasn't just the laughs that made Dexter's Lab so special. Nah, this cartoon was on point when it came to pop culture references. Like, they would throw in nods to everything. Movies, TV shows, you name it. Dexter was pretty much a pint-sized Spock or Doc Brown with all his wild scientific experiments, and Dee Dee? Classic younger sister archetype, even if she is the older sister. The show managed to make these references that both adults and kids could enjoy, no small feat. Oh, and let's not forget about the rest of the gang. The characters in Dexter's Lab were top-notch, and I'm not just talking about Dexter and Dee Dee. We had the gentle, soothing voice of Mom, the hilariously oblivious Dad, and Mandark, Dexter's arch nemesis in all his nerdy glory. Each one of them brought their own flavor to the table, adding to the overall charm of the show. Now, if we're looking back on it, it's obvious that Dexter's Lab was way ahead of its time. It set the standard for all these smart, character-driven, and culturally aware cartoons that are now a staple of Cartoon Network. And you know there's more to the story of Cartoon Network than just the shows. Back in the early 90s, Hanna-Barbera Studios, you know, the people who gave us classics like Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, and Scooby-Doo, had hit a bit of a rough patch. We are talking tumbleweed blows across the desert kind of dry spell. And with the Smurfs ending a few years earlier, financial woes looming, and lack of leadership, things weren't looking good. But then something magical happened. Ted Turner and his company Turner Broadcasting System acquired Hanna-Barbera, and Cartoon Network was formed. And in 1995, they launched the experiment called the What a Cartoon series. They put out a call to animators and asked them for ideas while allowing them to keep the rights to their characters. And this was a big deal, a massive game changer. And the response was overwhelming. What a Cartoon shorts weren't just standalone episodes, they were like test runs for full-fledged series. Almost all of Cartoon Network's classic shows from the late 90s and early 2000s started off as these shorts. And one of those was Dexter's Lab, which won a popular vote among viewers and was greenlit for a full series. So on April 28, 1996, Dexter's Laboratory hit the airwaves. And it was funny, it was smart, it was different. Behind the scenes, a group of young, Creative minds were getting their first big break. The show creators, Genndy Tartakovsky, I'm sorry, I know I just butchered your name, went on to make Samurai Jack and Star Wars The Clone Wars, which were both massive successes. Working alongside him were guys like Craig McCracken, Butch Hartman, and Seth MacFarlane, who later created shows like The Powerpuff Girls, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Family Guy. It wasn't just a turning point for Cartoon Network, but for the entire animation industry. Firstly, let's talk about its style. Dexter's Lab, in many ways, was a bit of a throwback. Picture those classic cartoons from the 40s and 50s, those charming and goofy animations that were so different from the kind of stuff Disney was putting out. Dexter's Lab tapped into that same charm. I mean, take Dexter himself, for example, and his sister Dee Dee. Their designs were simple and stylized, and far from realistic. And that wasn't by accident. It was a conscious choice. In many ways, the show's design was a nod to the old school Hanna-Barbera and UPA cartoons. Think Mr. Magoo and Gerard McBoing Boing. Even the format of the show harkened back to these older series, with most segments being around 7 minutes long. It felt like watching a comic strip come to life on your TV screen. And like those comic strips, the show was packed with visual gags, funny sound effects, and the kind of slapstick humor that had been a staple of animation for decades. And if you've ever watched Dexter's Lab, there's one episode that probably pops into your mind. I am talking about the Big Cheese. The setup is simple. Dexter wants to learn French overnight, so he uses one of his crazy inventions to try and do it in his sleep. But like many of Dexter's plans, things don't exactly go the way he wants them to. Instead of waking up fluent in French, he wakes up only able to say one phrase.
Omelette de fromage.
That's cheese omelet, for those of us who don't speak French, by the way. Now, that alone is pretty funny, but what makes this episode a classic is what happens next. Because Dexter can only say
Omelette de fromage.
He ends up in all these absurd situations. One minute he's landing a record deal because his phrase somehow becomes a hit song. Next, he's the center of attention for a group of swooning girls. He even ends up meeting world leaders, all because of 3 simple French words. But here's the catch. Dexter's secret lab, that special place where all his crazy inventions come to life, has a password. And guess what? It's not
Omelette de fromage.
Access denied.
It's Star Wars. Dexter can't say it, so he can't get into his lab. And when he tries, anyway, well, let's just say the lab isn't too happy about it. The brilliance of this episode and of Dexter's Lab as a whole is how it blends effective storytelling with old-fashioned humor. It takes a simple idea, a boy genius who can only say cheese omelet, and spins it into a hilarious, absurd adventure. It's the kind of comedic storytelling that hadn't been done well in years, maybe even decades. Anyway, now we've talked about Dexter's Lab's knack for blending old and new, but there's more to it. Something that added an extra layer of charm. You see, although Dexter's Lab drew a lot of its flavor from the iconic cartoons of the 50s, it wasn't simply attempting to imitate them. Instead, it employed these retro undertones as a sort of setting, a base for its distinctive style of storytelling. Consider Dexter's parents for a moment. On the surface, they appear to be your typical 1950s sitcom couple. Dad is always immaculately dressed in a crisp white shirt and tie, while mom is always prepared with her apron and rubber gloves. They're like an idealized image of the traditional American family. However, they're far from conventional. Despite Dad's gentlemanly appearance, he's often portrayed as the comedic figure.
Dexter, I am your father.
That is not possible. Oh, wait, no, you're right.
And conversely, mom, who might appear to be the archetype housewife, is actually the one with the real authority. It's a smart twist on expectations, a fun jab at the stereotypes we're accustomed to. A prime illustration of this dynamic is seen in the episode The Muffin King. In it, Dad gets a scent of mom's freshly baked muffins. and he essentially becomes a creature of pure desire. Dexter and Dee Dee are given the mission to safeguard the muffins from their dad's relentless cravings. It's a comedic chase scenario filled with sly puns and references to pop culture. And that's another point worth noting about Dexter's Lab. It wasn't solely for children. Yes, the vibrant animations and zany exploits were a hit with the younger audience, of course, but there was a ton for adults to appreciate as well. Episodes like The Muffin King were laden with intelligent humor and allusions to popular films, making the show equally entertaining for parents and even university students. And we totally cannot forget about the duo's relationship. Their dynamic was really at the heart of the show and paved the way for the kind of character development that would become a staple in Cartoon Network's lineup. Now, Dexter and Dee Dee were about as different as the two siblings could be. Dexter was the brains of the operation, always buried in his work, always dreaming up some new invention, and Dee Dee, on the other hand, was the free spirit, always bouncing around, poking her nose where it didn't belong, usually right in the middle of Dexter's latest experiment. Needless to say, their relationship was a little tense. You could even say they were rivals of sorts. Dexter would grumble about Dee Dee's stupidity, and Dee Dee would gleefully wreck his lab. It was a classic sibling rivalry, amplified by Dexter's inventions and Dee Dee's knack for chaos. But every time Dexter would belittle Dee Dee, every time he'd brush her off as just a stupid woman, it would boomerang right back at him. His lab would explode, his inventions would fail, and things would inevitably go awry. Each incident served as a wake-up call, highlighting that his condescending attitude was not just incorrect, but also harmful. And that's not to say that Dexter was a villain or anything. He was somewhat misguided, sure, but never outright cruel. We didn't despise him for his blunders. On the contrary, we enjoyed witnessing his stumbles and bumbles, his comic displays of frustration. His setbacks were lessons in humility, respect, and the realization that intelligence is multifaceted, and that every person has their unique strengths and weaknesses. Now, anyone with a sibling can testify that the frequent arguments and disagreements often veil something more profound, and that's indeed the case with Dexter and Dee Dee. They may argue and clash frequently, but beneath all that, there's an authentic bond of love and concern. Take episodes like Space Case or Fillet of Souls, for instance. In these stories, Dexter's schemes put Dee Dee in serious danger. And how does Dexter react? He marshals all his intellectual resources to rescue his sister. He feels remorse for the circumstance, and he steps forward to rectify his mistake. And it's in these moments that we catch a glimpse of a different Dexter, one who genuinely cares for his sister. And then there's the episode The Way of the Dee Dee. This one's a special treat because it provides a peek into Dexter's worldview. Dee Dee takes the initiative to show Dexter how to let loose and have fun, resulting in him causing havoc in his lab just like she always does. And interestingly, seeing Dexter behave this way worries Dee Dee. As for Dexter, he's more than content to return to his scientific fun. And due to all this, the show started a new era for cartoons. Isn't it fascinating to think about the ripple effect of a show like Dexter's Lab? I mean, sure, it's fun, quirky cartoon on its own, but its influence extended far beyond its own episodes. It set the stage for the future of Cartoon Network in ways that nobody could have predicted. Because Dexter's Lab didn't follow a serialized format, the character development had its limits. But even within those constraints, the show managed to create some memorable dynamics, especially between Dexter and Dee Dee, and that left a lasting impression. Take the Powerpuff Girls, for instance. I mean, those girls knew how to kick butt, but the action sequences and the colorful animation wouldn't have been half as impactful if it weren't for the unique personalities of Bubbles, Blossom, and Buttercup. And the same goes for shows like Ed, Edd and Eddy. The creators of those shows saw what Dexter's Lab had done and ran with it, adding their own twists and turns along the way. And Dexter's Lab went off the air in 2003, and Genndy Tartakovsky, again, I'm sorry, I know I'm butchering your name, the genius behind it, had already moved on to other projects such as Samurai Jack and Star Wars: The Clone Wars. But the impact of Dexter's Lab is still felt today. Dexter's Lab really was a springboard for some of animation's greatest minds. It's almost like a superhero origin story. First up, we've got Craig McCracken, and if you're a fan of the Powerpuff Girls, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, or Wander Over Yonder, you have this guy to thank. He was buddies with Dexter's Lab creator, Genndy Tartakovsky, back in college, and the two ended up working together on the show. McCracken was heavily influenced by Tartakovsky's animation style, and it shows in his own work, and now he's working on a live-action reboot of the Powerpuff Girls. But after the reboot we got recently, I'm a little scared of this, I'm not gonna lie. Then there's Seth MacFarlane. Yep, the Family Guy guy got his start working on Dexter's Lab, among other shows. His knack for satire, pop culture references, and celebrity impressions clearly started to bloom during his time at Cartoon Network. And now he's not just making us laugh with shows like American Dad and The Orville, but he's also released several albums and hosted the Oscars. Butch Hartman is another Dexter's Lab alum, and after working on the show, he went on to create some of Nickelodeon's biggest hits, including The Fairly Odd Parents and Danny Phantom. And then he took what he learned from Dexter's Lab and applied it to his own shows, creating fast-paced comedies with colorful characters and whimsical plots. And last but not least, we've got Rob Renzetti, and after directing episodes of Dexter's Lab, he went on to create My Life as a Teenage Robot for Nickelodeon. He also worked on big-name shows like My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, and even Gravity Falls. So you see, Dexter's Lab might have been about a boy genius, but it ended up creating a whole generation of animation geniuses. So here's to Dexter's Lab, a show that not only made us laugh, but also inspired many other great cartoons we know and love. And that's how Dexter's Laboratory changed cartoons forever. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a ton of fun to go into this, check it out, watch some of these incredible iconic episodes, and dig deep and learn about all of the influence that Dexter's Lab had for even current animation that we know and love today. So thank you so much if you've made it this far in the video. If you did like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could click that subscribe button. It helps the channel more than I could express, and it'll make sure that you don't miss any future uploads. I got a lot planned, so let me know in the comments other shows you'd like to see me cover here on the channel, and I'll see you next time I upload. Or you can click this video right here to watch some more. Later.